Now, when we're buying online, I think we all know to be on our guard against people that might be out to scam us. But these days, you need to be just as careful if you're trying to sell something too, because it seems there's no shortage of rogue customers out to get their goods for free with no intention of paying the money they owe. What's more, they've found a way to do it on some of the biggest websites in the business, taking advantage of a gap in the rules that means that while you might think you've got protection if a sale goes wrong, in fact, you're on your own. Once upon a time, the easiest way to sell something was either through an ad in the back of your local paper, setting up a stall at a car boot sale, or perhaps trying to interest a shopkeeper in a place like this. But times have certainly changed. Whether it's a prized possession or a piece of old junk that you're trying to get rid of, there are a whole host of websites designed to help you sell your stuff to the world. It should make the process a whole lot simpler. Hi there.
Hello.
I'd like to buy that silver jug, please.
Okay.
How much is it?
That's £20, please.
There we go. But online, dishonest buyers have found an opportunity you could never imagine anyone pulling off in a face-to-face transaction like this. I don't know quite what happened, but I didn't get my silver jug. Can I have my money back? Shameless, isn't it? Now, I honestly don't think there are any of us who'd be brazen enough to try something exactly like that. But there are some unscrupulous customers doing something very similar to online sellers who want the goods collected in person rather than posted to the buyer. As graphic designer Trevor O'Brien found out the hard way when he tried to sell a spare car bumper on eBay in February.
It was a Ferrari bumper for my brother-in-law Chris, and he said, if you try and sell it for me, whatever you get for it, I'll go halves with you.
But the bumper was so big, Trevor thought it would be too expensive and impractical to send by courier, so his eBay ad stated that the buyer would need to collect it in person. Trevor was delighted when the successful buyer immediately transferred to him £640 via PayPal. But when he was asked if a driver could be sent to pick it up, it made him suspicious.
Thought, well, if a driver picks it up, I'm not handing it to the person that's bought the item. So I did a quick search for eBay collection only scam. And sure enough, there were some scams that had come up whereby a driver will pick up the item and the buyer will then claim that he never received the item and he'll put a chargeback request in and the money will be taken back off of you. I then emailed him saying, no, you cannot send a driver. I need to hand it to the person that has bought the item and I will need you to prove who you are when you arrive.
That didn't put the buyer off, and sure enough, the next day he and a friend arrived, showed Trevor their passports and left with the bumper. Just to be sure, Trevor's son took a photo of them leaving, and even that wasn't the end of Trevor's measures to ensure he could prove that the bumper had been picked up.
As soon as they left, I messaged him within the eBay service and said, could you just message back saying that you've collected the item from me so it's all nice and tidy? And then I waited. There was no reply the next day. Then the alarm bells were ringing loudly in my head. I've been done.
Despite Trevor's efforts to avoid being scammed, his worst fears were about to be realised. To his horror, the PayPal transaction was reversed and the £640 he'd received taken back after the owner of the account that had paid him disputed that a genuine purchase had ever been made. Although Trevor showed PayPal the proof that the buyer had collected the bumper, that got him nowhere, leaving him with no bumper and no money for it either.
I was worried that a scam was coming. It's not so much the money, it's the fact that I'd been robbed. Daylight robbery, literally. I couldn't prevent it.
Now, PayPal does have a seller's protection policy that's supposed to help people like Trevor and compensate them if they fall foul of dodgy buyers. But unfortunately, due to one key detail, his transaction wasn't covered by that protection. Trevor had made a simple mistake by insisting that the buyer should come and collect the bumper in person. He thought that was the safest thing to do, but he'd unwittingly broken PayPal's rules. PayPal's seller protection won't apply if the goods you're selling are collected in person. So if Trevor had wandered down to the post office with that enormous bumper, he would have been covered for any fraud on the PayPal account. But because he didn't, he wasn't.
I thought it was all safe. I was naive. The way I feel towards that fraudster, he thinks he's just been clever and scammed some big organisation. He forgets that he's stolen from me, a person. It's really been upsetting for me.
Trevor hadn't expected any problems selling on eBay, which, after all, is the biggest site in the world for anyone to offload their stuff. But it's clear that scammers are using the same technique to con sellers on other sites, which use PayPal too. One of those is called Shpock, which bills itself as the boot sale app for beautiful things and has a particular focus on selling to people in your own area. In April, Joanne Hunter from Willenhall in the West Midlands used Shpock to advertise a family heirloom.
The bracelet was inherited by my husband from a late uncle, and it was a beautiful item. It was going to be passed down to my son, James. Because it was a lady's bracelet, it wasn't something he was ever going to wear, so my son asked if he could possibly sell it to fund a trip to London.
History buff James wanted to visit some of the capital's museums, so the money from the bracelet would come in handy. And about a week after Joanne advertised it on Shpock, they'd found a buyer.
The buyer came across in his messages as very friendly, very genuine, wanted the bracelet for his girlfriend as a gift, surprise gift. And I had no concerns.
The buyer transferred the funds using PayPal and said he would send his brother to pick up the bracelet. And when he did just that, Joanne's security camera recorded the whole encounter.
He seemed very nice, got the bracelet out of the packet, showed him the bracelet, made sure he was happy with it, and handed it over. And as far as we were concerned, the bracelet had been paid for, it had been collected, so everything was above board.
But, you guessed it, bad news was in store when a week later Joanne checked the balance on her PayPal account.
The account was actually in a deficit. It was showing minus funds, and we couldn't understand why.
The buyer was claiming they'd never received the bracelet, so PayPal had refunded them, taking the payment back out of Joanne's account. Initially, she wasn't too worried. After all, she could prove the item had been collected. Unfortunately, PayPal saw things differently. It told Joanne that just like Trevor, she wasn't covered because she'd allowed the bracelet to be collected in person.
I was devastated. If we would have had any inclination whatsoever that we had no seller protection, there's no way that we would have handed over such a valuable item.
Of course, Joanne would have been protected if she'd posted the bracelet or used a courier. But the whole point of the site she'd used, Shpock, is that it's aimed at people wanting to buy and sell locally, which makes it far more likely that buyers might want to collect an item in person rather than paying more to have it dispatched. A fact that our personal finance expert Sarah Pennells says leaves its users particularly vulnerable to scams such as this one.
What's happening is that fraudsters and scammers are exploiting this loophole. They seem to be very well aware of it, but many sellers aren't.
When we spoke to PayPal about all this, it reiterated that while its seller protection is there for times when things go wrong, it doesn't cover occasions when goods are collected in person because of the difficulty of establishing whether the goods have changed hands. However, PayPal went on to say that in such situations, it may consider a goodwill refund depending on the circumstances. And after reviewing Trevor and Joanne's cases, it's decided to do just that, giving them both a full refund as a goodwill gesture. We also spoke to Shpock, which told us that after learning of Joanne's problems, it restricted the buyer's account and advised her to contact the police. The company also said that, as an alternative to PayPal, it encourages users to meet the buyer or seller in person so they can exchange the money and the item directly. Shpock went on to say that while it works hard to take action against suspicious behaviour, it's considering the introduction of a seller protection scheme as part of continual improvements to ensure selling and buying are as smooth and safe as possible. There's always going to be some risk wherever you sell your possessions, and it's hard to see how any site, big or small, can totally remove that. But if the item you're selling is just too big to post, or you have no option other than to ask the buyer to collect, then Sarah has some wonderfully simple advice. She suggests avoiding payment methods like PayPal altogether and opting instead for something rather more old school.
Make sure that you insist on cash payment. That will put some buyers off, I think, but it's better to get cash than to be left with hundreds or even thousands of pounds out of pocket.